Look at this. These are all, each line is something that we did. Nobody did that before. And it's big stuff, too. Look, we have the hottest country in the world.
We are back with the big deal. This week, President Donald Trump marked over 1 year back in the Oval Office, making him one of only 2 presidents in U.S. history to serve non-consecutive terms. Here's a look back over the past year by the numbers. The president has issued more than 220 executive orders. That's the highest total since Franklin Roosevelt, who issued more than 500 back at the height of the Great Depression. Trump has issued more than 1,600 presidential pardons and commutations. That, of course, includes approximately 1,500 related to January 6th. In comparison, Joe Biden and Barack Obama and George W. Bush did not issue any pardons during their first year in office. And during year 1 of his first term, President Trump issued nearly 150. Joining me now for a little historical perspective is Douglas Brinkley, a presidential historian and a professor of history at Rice University. Great to see you, Professor. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Errol. Good to be with you.
So, Professor, there's this history of presidents using an electoral victory as a prelude to overreach. I mean, simply just going too far. I'm thinking of Franklin Roosevelt winning re-election in 1936 and then trying to pack the Supreme Court. I'm thinking of Richard Nixon winning by a record margin in 1972 and then leaving in disgrace just a couple of years later during the Watergate scandal. I think of with Trump, sort of tearing down the East Wing of the White House, shutting down entire agencies. Is this his moment of overreach?
Oh, President Trump's done massive overreach this past year. And I think the symbol of tearing down the East Wing in the way that he did it kind of overnight in a stealth-like way with wrecking balls when he said he was just going to be finessing it and giving our great public house a little bit of architectural integrity will become a symbol for Trump's first year and maybe his whole second term. It's easy to sign an executive order. You just sit there and just do the big scroll and say, I did this, I did that. They often get overturned by the next president. There's a reason you have to do the arduous journey of passing legislation in Congress because it sticks. And then Trump willy-nilly signing that many executive orders, many already are just mean nothing. And he'll have some that stay. And of course, it's helped Donald Trump to have a conservative Supreme Court with three members of it that he has chosen that are basically Trump justices on what was already a fairly conservative court. So I think in those ways, it is the age of Trump. He dominates. He's ubiquitous. All we do is talk about him. But history may see this past year as the beginning of the end, the unraveling of Donald Trump into being one of the worst presidents in American history, though one of the most notorious ones.
Our system of checks and balances, Professor, assumes that Congress will push back against presidential overreach, even if it's a member of their own party. But the House of Representatives we see sitting on their hands, even though the Constitution gives Congress power over tariffs. They've said nothing when presidential orders, the president orders prosecutions of elected officials, threatens to make and break treaties, another congressional power specified in the Constitution. Is some of this perhaps, though, going to be a permanent change? Has the legislature been permanently neutered?
It's a great question. I mean, when you first mentioned Franklin Roosevelt won big in 1936, but wasn't able to get everything he wanted through the Supreme Court, so he tried to pack it in 1937, and turned the court from 9 justices to 15. Lo and behold, who stopped FDR was members of his own parties. Democratic senators said, whoa, 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 way too far. No, they shut FDR's overreach down. You mentioned Richard Nixon, 72. I did a book, The Nixon Tapes, and you can listen to Nixon, December 1972. Christmas of 72. I just won the biggest victory. Somebody should do the major best-selling book, 1972. He started rattling off to himself what he accomplished, mainly going to China and that breakthrough. And when you start listening to Nixon tapes in 73, he's paranoid about what's going on with Watergate, and it just escalates on his tapes. And then in the end, it's people like Barry Goldwater, a conservative, who looked at Nixon and said, I'm abandoning you. Because you lied to me. We don't have people in the Republican Party willing to do that Donald Trump, with the exception of the libertarian Republicans like, Rand Paul, and Murkowski, who hasn't changed her colors, has kind of been consistent in her career. But there aren't many of them, and it's not a big moment of profiles and courage, except perhaps Mike Pence continuing to say the truth about January 6th and becoming an outlier of the Republican Party.
Yeah, it really is stunning. When the public learned that President Nixon had an enemies list and that he had directed the IRS to go after his opponents, it actually became part of the articles of impeachment. They were that serious about it. And yet today we hear sort of crickets from Congress as Trump directly orders criminal charges to be brought against his various enemies, often with little or no evidence and no investigation.
During Harry Truman's presidency, they used to call it the do nothing Congress. We now have a destructive Congress. We have a Congress that is able. They just are unable to do the people's business because they're worried about doing their own private banking and their own money making and who's going to fund their next reelection campaign. Money that's come into our systems and Citizens United is corroded, rusted, killed the spirit of democracy. And the symbol is Congress. They're just not doing the people's work. And look at the right ratings of Congress. American people don't like it. We don't think that we're being represented properly. So I don't know how Congress recovers as an institution or as from important legislative branch unless we get 20 Republicans that speak truth to power and stand up and show some spine. But every time they start to have a little spine, they become jellyfish again. Donald Trump says something mean or calls them, or talk radio intimidates them. It's a sad state, but let's hope it can fix itself out.
In our last minute, I did want to mention the Supreme Court, which is part of the equation, of course. There have been rulings that place few limits on the power of the president, and there's this so-called shadow docket, these emergency orders that don't really have any explanation or legal reasoning behind them. Is this going to be the legacy of the court under Chief Justice Roberts, that the president is immune from consequences and the Supreme Court doesn't necessarily have to explain why?
Look, one loves to have great legal debates. And one could look at the history of, say, the Federalist Society's view of America or Heritage Foundation and, the 2025 report and argue it, what's good for America, what's not. But I'm afraid Trump is so chaotic, so destructive, and that he knows how to make us all look at shiny objects, that we're all in whiplash mode. And meanwhile, the Supreme Court, obviously everybody in the Supreme Court is smart. They were brilliant lawyers, all of them. But they maybe believe their Federalist Society, Heritage Foundation, rigmarole, your talking points. It'd be like environmentalists saying, I want every lake clean, or a labor person saying labor should get 50% of profits. We could say those things and debate them, and that's what intellectual activity is. But in this case, you have a Supreme Court who's actually doing what Nixon said. Nixon told David Frost, if the president does it, it must be legal. And the Supreme Court, in my mind, is acting like if the president does it, it's okay. That's an extreme overreach of presidential power. Nothing that the founders thought of building a kind of authoritarian figure. Trump himself, in his own words, says you need a dictator once in a while, meaning me. It's unacceptable, but the court is trying to stay by what they learned through their, law reviews. And here's how I view the founders and original documents and the like, and not paying enough attention to the reality that we have to live of Trump's stomping on the Constitution.
Okay. Always great to have your perspective. Thank you very much, Professor Brinkley.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching our YouTube channel. Let Spectrum News be your resource for balanced, in-depth political coverage, and click the subscribe button right here. You can also download our app or watch us on TV to learn more about the candidates, where they stand on the issues, and more. We'll see you then.